From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Finger-pointing in the 38 Studios scandal has reached a fevered pitch. Curt Schilling claims Governor Lincoln Chafee's public comments torpedoed any hope of a private investor swooping in to save the day, while the governor says that's pure fiction and the company was well on its way to insolvency. Meanwhile, hundreds of employees at the troubled gaming company are out of work, and taxpayers could still be on the hook for a $75 million loan guarantee. But what about the game itself? Is it worth anything? Could Copernicus save us all, or do we face a reckoning? This week on Newsmakers, our guests, entrepreneur and tech executive Angus Davis and news editor for gaming site Joystiq, Alexander Sliwinski. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Angus, welcome back to the program, and Alexander, thank you for joining us. As obviously we're going to be talking about 38 Studios today, and I do want to treat this as a roundtable discussion on 38 Studios, much like we do with politics from time to time, and I can't think of a better group, Ted included, to discuss this. Let's start with the $75 million question, Angus, first. Can 38 Studios be saved, in your opinion?
I don't think that the company is going to continue as an independent company, no. But I think that there's probably some valuable assets that the company might have that potentially some other game manufacturer would want to come along and acquire the business. But I think we should all get ready to be taking a serious loss on that investment. And frankly, it's $112 million, I think, the total obligation. Right. The other question, too, is I do think that the folks that worked at 38 Studios have a bright future ahead. The tech industry has a very low unemployment rate, so I think those people will go on to successful careers at other companies.
And actually, before we go on to Alexander, you just hired someone from 38 Studios, if I'm correct, right?
That's right. They start on Monday, so they were available to start quickly.
Yeah, right.
But that was one of the first things when I heard that this was happening. I immediately sat down. I think I might have even tweeted to Ted. I sat down on LinkedIn and I pulled up the profile of every single employee there, because in my industry, in the technology industry, finding talented workers is the hardest thing. So I went through 130 some odd folks and set aside people that, those would be interesting people for us to
And I know you weren't the only one, right? I think Charlie Kroll told me, and Derek he was looking to, and others were over last week.
And then it became a national frenzy as well. People started on Twitter using a hashtag. Which
International frenzy, actually.
Really?
There you go.
I mean, there's a company from Iceland that came in and was looking, so.
Yeah, so there's a real need for talented tech workers, and unfortunately I think most of the folks hiring 38 Studios employees are going to be outside of Rhode Island. We just don't have as many tech companies in Rhode Island.
Alexander, we should point out that you work for Joystiq.com, that's Joystiq with a Q.com, and it's really one of the leading news agencies when it comes to the gaming industry. You've broken a lot of stories on 38 Studios. And the same question to you about whether or not 38 Studios, in your opinion, can be saved. And what do you make of the assets that Angus is talking about here? And we talk about intellectual property and where this game Copernicus was.
I mean, that's what we're mostly talking about right now, is intellectual property. Like, how much is this world of Amalur worth, and how much can they sell it off for? Or, I mean, it's not even the studios, 38 Studios' ability to sell off the property. As far as our understanding of the paperwork goes, they put it up as collateral to the state of Rhode Island. So it's going to be up to the state of Rhode Island to sell off these assets, whether that's the intellectual property, the computers, everything else that is there, even the stuff in Maryland, from the studio in Maryland. We have absolutely no idea how much all of that's going to be worth, and whether Rhode Island even has the people on staff to auction off or sell off or make these deals.
Meaning we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that while there might be some value in those assets, I think the likelihood we're going to realize that value is very low.
So what is that value? I mean, we talk about $115 million we could be on the hook for. What could we get for the intellectual property at 38? Do you guys have any clue?
I think the problem is that we're asking that question today.
Okay.
The company was burning $4 million a month. So, back when the company had, say, $16 or $20 million in the bank, i.e. 4 or 5 months of life left, that would have been the right time to go through that process, to basically run an auction to sell the company, engage your largest investor, i.e. the state, in that conversation. Would you be able to return enough to your investor that they could make whole on their investment? Probably not. Probably not. But, would it be zero? if we had had the time to work on this, we could have been doing that. Unfortunately, we're in a situation now where companies run the tank to empty, and the EDC didn't even know until after it had already happened.
The best estimate we had before the layoffs and everything like that was $20 million. That was from one of the sort of the top industry analysts. He said it was $20 million. But after the layoffs and after everything else, I mean, it's pennies on the dollar. I mean, it could be $1 million, it could be $2 million.
That's my question, Alexander, because who buys it now without employees to finish the game, the ones who started it, without an infrastructure, a company really in place at this point? It's they would get the rights to use the art and the characters and the storyline, right? But who wants that?
They would also need the tech, because that's the other part that's the killer. Like,
explain that, yeah.
All of the modifications done to the game engine and all the things that the workers did to make it work is part of the tech. So you don't just have to buy the intellectual property, you have to buy the computers and all the tech and everything else that goes along with it. Again, depending on how much Rhode Island wants to charge, I mean, and given the history now of it, would someone even want to pick up all of that or just move on and make a new world?
Okay, let's talk about this tech for a minute, and we're going to stay with you. A lot of viewers, and myself included, not huge gamers, so talk in simple terms, if you can, about games like, what games like Copernicus are, these massive online games where there's multiple players all playing at the same time.
And maybe even just for people at home before we get there, 2 games from 38 Studios so far.
Yep.
First one came out in February, Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning. That was built by the studio in Maryland, which, as you explained to me, they bought in 2009 and sort of put their world on what had already been built in Maryland.
Correct.
The game we, as Rhode Island, backed was this Project Copernicus, the massively... What's the whole
Massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
Thank you.
That's rolls right off the top.
Yeah, right. So anyway, just to get people up to speed. So Copernicus was our investment, and to Tim's question.
Okay, so the major difference is with Reckoning, the game that came out. You take that game, it's on a disc, you put it in your Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, and you just play it off of that. And everything is on that disc.
Okay.
When it comes to the MMO, the game that Rhode Island was working on, even if you got a disc or even if you downloaded it, there's still a whole other thing going on behind the scenes. So the game itself is there, but then, think of it like we are here right now at this table. I mean, the game is, the 4 of us talking, but then we've got the cameras doing, behind the scenes stuff. We've got the producers, we've got the directors, we've got the studio. So in the case of the game, there's the servers, there's the game masters who are supposed to be watching what's going on in the game. There's the customer support. If it's a subscription game, it costs $10 a month.
Would Rhode Island house all that infrastructure, or would that have been outsourced to whatever company picked it up?
Depends on how it was negotiated.
This sounds like you're making a movie, right? That's
No,
the analogy to me is you put a ton of money up front and then hope that it's a big hit at the box office.
But that's why I want...
Exactly. And you don't know, do you have Waterworld? You have something that's a big flop,
right.
Or do you have Titanic, which is a huge hit, or Avatar, something like that.
But that's why Ted and I are still working on trying to find out who were the consultants on this. Who were the when you make a movie, you bring in movie people to explain to you how to make a movie. When you make a video game studio, who did Rhode Island bring in to teach them how to make a video game studio or how to oversee a video game studio?
We should never have been in this deal in the first place, and a lot of rational people from the outside looking in were saying that at the time,
including yourself. I mean, we should point out, and I know I've heard you in other interviews say you don't like to be the Monday morning quarterback and whatnot, but you did a lot more than most in 2010. You wrote letters to the EDC, to Moody's. All that. So what were the red flags for you? What bothered you most about this deal back then?
Well, I've been involved in, as a venture capitalist investor in a lot of startup companies. I'm currently an investor in close to 2 dozen such companies. And so I've had an opportunity to see the risk factors associated with starting a business. And, as Alexander was just mentioning, creating an MMO, a massive multiplayer online game, it is like making a movie. And so there's few businesses you can start in the tech industry that are more capital intensive than that one. I mean, maybe starting your own cell phone carrier or something like that would be more capital intensive.
But hey, they make money. I mean, if they were all failures,
So-
they wouldn't
And
be
at
out
the
there.
time, we were told the diligence was being done, and yes, they understood the risk. Governor Kachiri told us that, Keith Stokes told us that, and this was going to work out, and they wouldn't be investing if it wasn't risk. But
Well, then
you
where
saw
was
it
the
different.
private capital? There was no private capital coming alongside.
Well, wait a minute. Kurt Schilling said in an interview with the Providence Journal that it was Governor Chafee's public comments that torpedoed some private capital he had waiting in the wings. Do
Oh,
you-
in the 11th hour.
Do you buy it?
Not at all, because first off, Governor Chafee is on the record answering one of Ted's questions when asked if the company was fine in April. According to Governor Chafee, he's like, "Oh yeah, it was fine. This happened overnight," and that's not true. That's not true. This is something where we could have acted sooner, and so it's not true that an investor doesn't come in after you miss payroll. I mean, one of the most valuable things they're looking for is the team. So the time to be speaking with investors and getting private capital would have been 4 or 5 months ago. And unfortunately, the company wasn't able to execute on that, and the state was caught flat-footed. And as a result, we have basically a mess on our hands. But I don't think that I don't think those comments were helpful. I don't think saying, "Oh, we're trying to help a business remain solvent," is something anybody wants to hear said about their business. I think there's a more tactful way of saying you're trying to help out a company than using words that question their solvency. But I don't think that torpedoed the investment.
What about Governor Chafee's comments that the game Ted referenced to Reckoning, the game that was built in Maryland, was a failure?
Again, I would love to know who Governor Chafee's advisors are. Who have been
We know Providence Equity Partners, the big private equity firm in Providence, has helped him out. He won't say who from there, but they are a pretty big media firm, but we don't know exactly who's talking to them.
Yeah, I mean, over 1 million copies sold on a new intellectual property is fantastic in the video game industry. And that doesn't even count what the sequel would have made, because...
Which you broke recently that there was one in the works.
Yes, there was one in the works. And historically, in this industry, sequels always do better than the previous incarnation. So say this one sold 1.3 million units in the first 90 days or whatever it was. By the time the sequel comes out a couple of years from now, it'll have hit maybe 2 million, 2.5, because there'll be sales, there'll be all this other type of stuff that's going on. So by the time that sequel comes out and that sequel sells 3 million units, you've already sold 2 million units. It's a long tail. That's the way these things work.
So they sell a little over 1 million copies. What are they, $60 a pop? So we're talking $60 million in sales. What is the relationship that 38 Studios could have had with Electronic Arts, which people understand that's like a book publisher, right? That gets the product out to the people, where they didn't realize that kind of money, or did they, and they just burned through it?
Here's the difficulty on anything regarding these types of contracts. I can make a game with Ted, I can make a game with you, and our contracts could be completely different. Like your percentage and your percentage might be entirely different. There is no standardized contract. So there's no way of telling whether 38 Studios had even received a check, was making any money, and how much money off of the revenues they even received. We have no idea.
Plus, if I had been structuring that deal, I would have pushed EA to give me a large prepayment, because as a startup business, I'm looking for capital. So they could have potentially sold or taken the cash that they were due in royalties long ago.
I believe, in fact, that's what we
35
have been
million,
told they
right?
did. They got an early payment from EA, and they're not getting royalties now.
So did the 38 Studios then, I know we're guessing here, but did they set the bar too high on the level of expectation for sales, and it just didn't uphold?
I would agree with Alexander. If you have never shipped a game before as a company, you're an unknown company with an unknown brand, an unknown franchise, you come out and within a couple months, if it's true, if those numbers are true, and they sold over 1.2 million copies of that game, I don't think it would be fair to describe it as a failure. I think what Governor Chafee was saying is, hey, that game, if it was so successful, it should have resulted in private capital coming into this
or
business.
at least
and that
making payroll.
Well, I think that's a flaw in their business plan. I don't think they could have made payroll. I mean, they were burning such a high amount of cash each month to employ 380 people. There's not enough revenue from that game to cover that cost structure.
All right, we have to take a break here. I want to continue this conversation. I'd like to know, Alexander, when we come back, why there is no interest from Electronic Arts for a game like Copernicus? Or what about Reckoning 2? If it was so successful, are they somebody that might pick up the game? But we're going to hold and we're going to answer that question when we come back. And I do want to note that since 2010, we have made repeated offers to Curt Schilling to join us on this program. We did so as recently as this week, and so far we're told by his representatives that he just can't make the program. That offer always stands here on Newsmakers. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right is Ted Nesi from WPRI.com. This week we're talking 38 Studios, and our guests, Angus Davis. He's a tech executive. He's also founder of Swipely and an entrepreneur. And we have Alexander Sliwinski. He's a news editor at Joystiq.com. So the question before we went to break was, so if the game was so successful, they're working on a sequel, and you have Copernicus in the works, where's a monster publisher, for lack of better words, like Electronic Arts, who took the first game? Why haven't they stepped up?
Why step up when you could, if you know that this is going to play out the way it is? Like you said, I mean, this, if you're watching the numbers, you probably could have seen this coming from months ago. Why would you step in when you can pick it up? When you can pick up this intellectual property for pennies on the dollar?
Do you think they will? Tough question for you to answer, I'm sure.
I mean, that's sort of an executive question on their side. Electronic Arts already has a fantasy sort of world of their own called Dragon Age.
Well, so I read an expert say in the Boston Globe to what you just said. He said, quote, and I tweeted this one, he said, quote, another game, referring to Copernicus, another game with dwarfs and elves and men in tights. There are a million games like it.
Yes.
So
that's
fantasy,
true.
That's true. This is
yes. I mean, when this game was being developed, they got, you know, a fantasy artist, a fantasy writer. It is a high fantasy world. It is very much in that, you know, Schilling played EverQuest. There's also World of Warcraft. These are all fantasy worlds. That's where these MMOs have gone.
So it's a saturated market?
That would be the understatement of the century.
Okay.
Let me stick with you, Alexander, because we you and I started talking in the summer of 2010 when this began, because I was looking for video game experts to help me understand what decisions were being made here. And I remember at the time you sounded very surprised that Rhode Island was taking this, and you were sort of walking me through the first 4 years of 38 Studios before there was any state involvement. Can you sort of give people a brief sketch of sort of what was and wasn't heard about? It was first called Big Monster Games, I think, or Green Monster Games.
Monster Games?
You know, so what the first 4 years of it, up until Rhode Island suddenly got involved, what were people saying about this? Was there excitement in the industry? What was going on?
No, it was secretive. I mean, the same way you've seen that secrecy once they came down to Rhode Island, you saw that secrecy before. And that level of secrecy is normally reserved for, in our industry specifically, for companies like Blizzard or Valve, which are multi-billion-dollar companies that have long-established franchises and everything like that. In you know, the mainstream, you could say Apple. You know, Apple is very, very secretive, and we sort of saw that same thing from 38 all the way back then. We kept, in sort of the Boston area, we saw people getting hired. We saw you know, this game. We heard about a couple of reboots on what they were trying to do, but we were never invited to the studio. There weren't sort of the standard kind of marketing plan. And I understand that Schilling didn't want to, or whoever his advisors were telling him like not to follow this sort of standard. They were going to show it when it's done.
But that doesn't build hype.
But it's not. But this is a startup. This isn't a company that's got 10 or 20 years of experience. This is a startup. The idea that they could just hang out and then, you know, within 6 months just come out with everything is not normal.
So what was your thought the first time you heard Rhode Island's probably going to give a $75 million taxpayer loan guarantee to this company?
Yeah. I mean, you laugh because you don't know what to do. As a journalist, like you're thinking in your head, okay, there has to be due diligence, there has to be oversight, there has to be these other things that have happened behind the scenes that must have occurred. You know, the first time, you know, we kept covering that they were looking to go down in Rhode Island, and then, you know, I get contacted by you, and that's when we started talking, and you're telling me about the government side of things. And it just doesn't, from an industry perspective, it didn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. It was a head scratcher then, and it made no sense.
Well, that oversight should have presumably come from the EDC, and the governor, we tape on a Friday, announced yesterday they have 3 new board members that he's appointing. They still need Senate approval to the EDC. I just feel like every couple of years we're talking about restructuring at the Economic Development Corporation. Remember the Varecchia report that came out? There's such a high turnover at the top position. I'm wondering if you think, Angus, the EDC provides a valuable role in building Rhode Island's economy.
Well, I think Rhode Island has, as I'm sure most people watching know, huge headwinds on the economy right now. We have an astronomically high unemployment rate, and I think people are frustrated, and they see one-off special deals like this one, and it makes them sick to their stomach. I do think that investing in attracting private capital to invest in growing a tech sector, a knowledge economy sector in Rhode Island is a good strategy. I think having technology businesses grow in Rhode Island is a good idea. Those are high-paying jobs, very low unemployment in that sector. I can say as an executive of a tech company, the EDC has never reached out to me or engaged in my business. We attracted actually the largest Series A investment, private capital software and company investment in the state's history, and we never even have spoken with the EDC. Now, there's a lot of challenges to growing a tech business, and so we kind of got our heads down and we're doing our thing. But I think the EDC is very troubled, and I also don't understand why they didn't monitor this company. This was such a controversial decision. I get it that the governor was opposed to it, but that ship had sailed. And this was the EDC's biggest single investment, I believe.
Oh,
and
far, yeah.
$112 million were obligated, with taxpayers are on the hook for.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that we would be checking the reading the monthly checking account balance. It doesn't require a forensic audit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure that will be interesting, but if you're burning $4 million a month, it doesn't require, you don't need to be a CPA to see, oh look, there's $16 million in the checking account. Divide by 4 months to go. 12 million. Divide by 4, 3 months to go. And those would have been the times to engage with EA or others to try to find a soft landing.
But that's why when you're asking, who's going to come in and pick this up, at EA or at any other major publisher, they were doing the math behind the scenes. Like, they probably had a pretty good idea of how this was going to play, and they just let it play
And if
out.
the company had private investors sitting on its board, I mean, my understanding is that the EDC didn't even go to their board meeting. I'm not sure if that's
EDC
true.
didn't get a board member, no, to
Right.
my knowledge.
Which is, I mean, why would you ever agree to be
Right.
somebody's biggest investor and not even get in
Have a
return
seat
have
at
a
the
seat at the
table.
board? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
Or, as
insane.
you point out, equity. There was no equity stake for Rhode Island in the company, which I realize is meaningless now probably, but at the time. So, but going to EDC then, I mean, you've a lot of business experience. I know a lot of your fellow tech executives as well, and there is a lot of enthusiasm in that sector, but I don't hear much like, if only we had X from the EDC or something like that. I mean, how relevant is EDC? How important is it? If EDC disappeared, how big an impact do you think it would have on our economy?
You wouldn't have lost $112 million.
Well, that's true, yeah.
That's true. Going forward.
Going forward, though.
I mean, look, I see my biggest challenges as a tech executive trying to grow a tech company. We have about 35 employees right now. Our biggest challenges are, attracting the talented workers that we need to grow our business, and certainly that's a challenge here in Rhode Island. There are not as many people that have the skills that we look for as software engineers, for example.
Now, is that because they're not here already, or because they don't want to come here when you find someone elsewhere?
It's a little bit of both. There's a very high quality of life in Rhode Island. There is concern people face about sending their kids to public schools versus Massachusetts. Yeah, I definitely hear that. I mean, I have employees that live in Massachusetts that have kids, and we pay their Amtrak. I mean, it costs me, I think it's $400 or $500 a month to cover their Amtrak pass so that they can live in Massachusetts and come down to Providence each day. But look, finding talented workers is a much bigger challenge for me than practically almost anything else. And then, we don't have the type of venture capital ecosystem that Massachusetts or Silicon Valley have.
What does that mean?
Just the sources of private capital aren't here.
Why do they have to be geographically located in Rhode Island?
Less so. That is less of an issue than it was 10 years ago. Our big investors are all based in Silicon Valley.
Sure.
They're the folks behind companies like LinkedIn and Zynga. And we're actually the first time they've ever invested in a Rhode Island company, so that's exciting. I get a kick out of that. But the ecosystem of other tech companies would be helpful. Imagine if you worked and just down the road was Google and just down the road was Apple. Well, think about that. They employ thousands of workers. And so
That cross-pollination.
You can. You're always. Yeah. I mean,
There's a talent pool there.
Exactly. I mean, you could be at the Whole Foods or picking up a bottle of milk and run into somebody that could be the next tech engineer on your team. And here it's just a rare to find that type of talent.
Alexander, I think we have just under 2 minutes to go in the program, so totally different question from what we've been talking about. I find your job intriguing because Ted and I are covering retirement board meetings and interviewing politicians and
mobsters.
And mobsters, and you're you're writing about games, and I'm not minimizing your work.
Right.
I've read a lot of what you've done, and it's great stuff. But it just seems like a great job. What is it that what game are you salivating for right now? What's on the horizon that people should just be wowed with?
Wow. I have absolutely no idea how to answer that question.
Well, how'd you get into this? How do you end up being the news editor of the gaming news?
In 30 seconds.
Okay, I worked for a local regional newspaper in the Boston area, which no longer exists, of course. And I wrote a story about gay and lesbian issues in the World of Warcraft. They were not allowing guilds within that game to be defined by certain criteria. And I wrote that up, and that story got picked up by the Times, the Washington Post, a bunch of other places.
That will definitely help your resume out for sure.
Right. And there, at that time, there's an aggregate site called Dig, and it made it on Dig, and all that stuff. So it did well, and
onward.
And onward. And we have to go. Angus Davis, Alexander Sliwinski, thank you very much for joining us. For Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. If you missed any of it, WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.